The engine exploded at 35,000 feet. Both pilots unconscious. 312 passengers screaming toward death. Then the fashion magazine hit the floor and a voice cut through the chaos, former F-22 pilot. I can fly. Nobody knew the woman in seat 3A had killed 287 people 6 months ago, and sworn never to fly again. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Seat 3A, Business Class, American Airlines Flight 617. Los Angeles to New York JFK. Iris Blake turned another glossy page of Vogue, her manicured fingernail tracing the edge of an article about Milan Fashion Week. The champagne cart rolled past. She declined with a practiced smile, the kind wealthy women give service staff, polite but distant. The flight attendant moved on without a second glance. To everyone around her, Iris was exactly what she appeared to be: money, taste, privilege. The silk blouse was Armani. The jeans were $700. The sunglasses pushed into her honey blonde hair were Chanel. She looked like someone who'd married a hedge fund manager or inherited old family wealth. Someone who flew business class the way other people took taxis. The businessman in 3B, laptop open, spreadsheet glowing, glanced at her periodically with mild interest. Attractive woman. Expensive clothes. Wedding ring on her finger, though he couldn't see it was just a prop to avoid conversations exactly like the one he was considering starting. Iris felt his eyes and kept reading. Fall's bold new palette, emerald, rust, and midnight blue. She didn't look like someone who'd killed 287 people. The Boeing 777-300ER hummed steadily at 35,000 feet, engines purring their familiar triple-note harmony. Most passengers wouldn't notice that sound. Iris heard it automatically, the slight variation in pitch between the number 1, 2, and 3 engines. The subtle whistle of air over control surfaces. The pressure differential in the cabin. Stop it, she told herself. You're not a pilot anymore. You're just a passenger. 6 months ago, Captain Iris Venom Blake had turned in her wings. 6 months ago, she'd walked away from the United States Air Force, from the F-22 Raptor, from 2,200 combat hours and a service record that made generals nod with approval. 6 months ago, she'd stopped being able to look at herself in the mirror. The call sign, Venom, had been earned in her 3rd year flying the Raptor. She'd been escorting a reconnaissance mission over hostile territory when enemy fighters appeared, 4 of them, Russian-made Su-35s flown by experienced pilots. Her wingman's targeting system had malfunctioned. She'd been alone against 4. Venom, break off. RTB immediately, her commander had ordered. Return to base. Survive to fight another day. But the reconnaissance aircraft couldn't outrun the fighters. If she left, they'd shoot it down. 12 intelligence officers would die. Negative, she'd replied. I have 4 targets. Engaging. What happened next became legend in the fighter community. She'd used the sun, the terrain, and pure flying skill to separate the enemy fighters. She'd taken them one by one, fast, precise, lethal. 4 kills in 6 minutes. No warning. No mercy. Just surgical strikes that left smoking wreckage in mountain valleys. You never see Venom coming, her squadron mates said afterward. You just see the smoke. She'd flown 147 combat missions after that. 89 air superiority patrols. 12 presidential escorts. She'd been promoted to captain at 28. The Air Force had wanted to make her a poster girl, female fighter pilot, beautiful, deadly, perfect for recruitment campaigns. She'd declined. She wasn't interested in fame. She flew because it was what she was built to do. Because when people needed protecting, she could protect them better than almost anyone else in the sky. And then came Flight 2847. Now she ran an art gallery in Santa Monica. She wore designer clothes and talked to wealthy clients about composition and emotional resonance. She drove everywhere, even cross-country trips, because she'd made herself a promise. Never fly again. Never touch aircraft controls. Never be responsible for lives in the air. Her business partner, Marcus, a former corporate lawyer who'd burned out and bought into the gallery with her, had practically begged her to break that promise for this trip. "Iris, you can't drive to New York for the gallery opening. It's 6 hours versus 4 days. Just fly. It's perfectly safe. You'll be a passenger. You won't be responsible for anything except showing up and charming the New York art crowd." So here she was. Reading about fashion. Pretending the engine sounds didn't trigger muscle memory. Pretending she couldn't automatically calculate their altitude, speed, and fuel consumption just from the cabin pressure and engine pitch. "You're not Venom anymore," she reminded herself. "You're just Iris. Regular civilian Iris who sells paintings and drinks overpriced lattes." She turned another page. The return of the power suit, confidence in pinstripes. The woman in the photograph wore a sharp blazer and had the kind of expression that said she ran boardrooms and didn't take nonsense from anyone. Iris had worn that expression once. In a flight suit. In a cockpit. When she'd been someone who mattered. Stop it. Stop romanticizing what you were. You were a killer. You killed 287 innocent people because you followed orders. The guilt was always there, just beneath the surface. She'd learned to live with it the way amputees learn to live with phantom pain. Some days were better than others. Some nights she could sleep without seeing their faces. Not their real faces, she'd never seen those. But the faces her imagination created. The young mother with a baby. The elderly couple holding hands. The businessman who'd kissed his wife goodbye that morning and promised to be home for dinner. All dead because she'd locked missiles and pulled the trigger. At 35,000 feet, somewhere over Colorado, everything changed. The detonation was catastrophic. The number 2 engine, right side, middle position on the triple engine configuration, didn't just fail. It exploded. A turbine blade, weakened by a microscopic fracture that had escaped inspection, shattered at 15,000 RPM. The blade punched through its neighbor. That blade destroyed another. Within milliseconds, the entire turbine stage disintegrated. Chunks of hardened steel shredded through the containment housing like shrapnel through paper. Metal fragments the size of fists punched through the fuselage. Hydraulic lines severed. Fuel lines ruptured. The aircraft lurched violently right as thrust vanished from one engine and the other two suddenly pushed asymmetrically. Iris's magazine hit the floor. Her hands locked on the armrests, not from fear, but from training. Her mind was already analyzing even as her body reacted: catastrophic turbine failure. Explosive decompression. Thrust asymmetry causing uncommanded roll. Structural damage to wing. Possible fuel leak. Fire risk. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments. Passengers screamed. The businessman's laptop flew off his tray table and shattered against the seat ahead, scattering keys like plastic teeth. A woman across the aisle vomited from the sudden pressure change. A child's shriek cut through the chaos, pure terror in a voice too young to understand death but old enough to know something was very, very wrong. The captain's voice came over the intercom, strained and wrong: "Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced an engine failure. Please remain calm. Flight attendants, prepare for emergency procedures." But Iris heard what the other passengers didn't: the captain's voice was slurred. Words slightly too slow, consonants soft at the edges. Hypoxia. The fuselage puncture had depressurized the cockpit faster than the passenger cabin. The pilots were losing consciousness. She counted seconds. 30. 45. A flight attendant, older woman, maybe late 50s, name tag reading Susan, grabbed the interphone to the cockpit. She listened, her professional mask cracking, face going white. She pressed the button again. No response. Susan rushed to the cockpit door and punched in the emergency access code. The door didn't budge. Something was blocking it from inside. Or someone, a pilot, unconscious, body slumped against the mechanism. The aircraft began to turn. Slow at first, then accelerating. A spiral. The autopilot was programmed to maintain heading and altitude, but it couldn't compensate for the massive asymmetric thrust, one engine destroyed, the other two still running at cruise power, pushing them into a death turn. Iris watched through the window as the horizon tilted. 30 degrees. 35. The turn was tightening, accelerating. She knew what came next. Every pilot did. It was called a graveyard spiral. The aircraft would roll inverted, nose would drop, and they'd plummet. At this altitude, they had maybe 2 minutes before structural loads tore the aircraft apart or they hit the ground. Susan's voice cracked through the cabin, professional training barely holding back panic. Is there a pilot on board? Anyone with flight experience? We need help immediately. Silence. 312 passengers staring at each other in terror. Someone shouted, "What's happening?" A man in first class stood up, wild-eyed, "We're going to crash. We're all going to die." A child started sobbing. An elderly man began praying in Spanish, fingers working invisible rosary beads. Iris sat perfectly still. Her mind screamed two competing truths at once. Don't. You swore. You're done. You can't be responsible for lives again. You'll fail. You'll kill them like you killed the others. If nobody flies this aircraft in 90 seconds, it enters an unrecoverable spiral. 312 people die. That's not a possibility. That's physics. She thought about the art gallery. The designer clothes. The new life she'd built that didn't involve death and duty and impossible choices. She thought about Flight 2847. It had been a Tuesday morning, crystal clear skies over the Pacific Northwest. She'd been flying routine combat air patrol when the alert came through: commercial airliner hijacked, pilots dead, terrorists in control, heading toward downtown Seattle. The aircraft, a Boeing 737 with 287 passengers, had been taken over somewhere over Idaho. By the time fighters scrambled, it was already approaching the Seattle metro area. Population, 4 million. Intelligence suggested the hijackers planned to crash the aircraft into the Space Needle or downtown high-rises. Another 9/11, smaller scale but still catastrophic. Venom, this is Crystal Palace Actual. The voice of a 3-star general. You are weapons-free on the hijacked aircraft. Authorization comes from POTUS directly. Repeat, you are cleared hot. Take the shot. She'd locked her missiles on the 737. She could see it through her canopy, a white aircraft with blue tail, completely ordinary, carrying people who'd boarded expecting to arrive safely, who'd kissed loved ones goodbye and settled into their seats with books and headphones and coffee. Venom, target is approaching Seattle airspace. Time to impact, 4 minutes. Take the shot. That's an order. Her wingman, Razor, had been silent on their private channel. She'd known he was watching her, waiting, probably praying she wouldn't have to do it. But she'd been trained to follow orders. And the math was brutal: 287 people on the aircraft versus potentially 3,000 on the ground. It wasn't even close. Venom, target locked. Fox 3. She'd fired both missiles. The 737 had exploded over the Cascade Mountains, 30 miles from Seattle. Pieces of fuselage, wings, engines, and human remains scattered across 10 square miles of forest. All 287 aboard killed instantly, a mercy, at least. They never knew what hit them. The president called it a necessary tragedy. The military gave her a commendation and a promotion. The media ran stories about the brave pilot who'd made an impossible choice, who'd saved thousands by sacrificing hundreds. But Iris saw their faces every night. Faces she'd never actually seen but imagined anyway. Faces her guilt constructed from news reports and passenger manifests that had been published. Emily Rodriguez, age 7, traveling with her mother to visit grandparents in Seattle. David and Margaret Chen, married 62 years, flying to their granddaughter's wedding. Sarah Thompson, 24, pregnant with her first child, heading home after a business trip. 284 more. All dead because she'd followed orders. The therapist the Air Force assigned her had tried to help. You saved thousands of lives. You did your duty. The terrorists killed those people, not you. But Iris couldn't accept that. Her missiles had destroyed the aircraft. Her finger had pulled the trigger. The terrorists had created the situation, but she'd ended those lives. 3 months after the incident, she resigned her commission. Turned in her wings. Walked away from flying forever. And now here she was, watching 312 more people spiral toward death. If you don't do this, you guarantee they die. At least if you try, there's a chance. But what if you fail? What if you kill them just like you killed the others? Then they die either way. But if you do nothing, you're choosing to let them die. And that's worse. The aircraft's bank angle hit 40 degrees. Blood rushed to her head from the G-forces. Passengers were screaming now, a chorus of terror. Susan was shouting into the interphone, desperate, getting no response. 60 seconds until the spiral became unrecoverable. Iris made her choice. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, gripping the seat backs for balance against the tilting deck. Her legs were steady. Her hands didn't shake. Whatever else she'd lost, muscle memory remained. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the unmistakable authority of someone who'd commanded fighters in combat zones, who'd given orders that meant life or death. I'm a pilot. Former military. I can fly. Every head in business class turned. The businessman in 3B stared at her like she'd sprouted wings. A woman 3 rows back gasped, "Thank God." Susan rushed over, desperate hope flooding her face. You can fly commercial aircraft? I can fly anything, Iris said simply. Get me into that cockpit. Now. Susan and 2 male passengers, one built like a linebacker, another wiry and strong from what looked like years of manual labor, threw their weight against the cockpit door. It was jammed, or blocked, or both. The door frame had warped slightly from the fuselage damage. Or the locking mechanism had failed. Or both. The aircraft's spiral steepened. 45 degrees now. The cabin tilted at a sickening angle. Overhead bins popped open, spilling luggage. Someone's carry-on bag tumbled down the aisle. Faster, Iris said. Not panicked. Just stating fact. We have maybe 60 seconds before the spiral becomes unrecoverable. After that, structural loads will tear the aircraft apart or we'll be going too fast to pull up. The 3 of them hit the door again. It cracked but held. The linebacker swore and rammed his shoulder into it with everything he had. The wiry man added his weight. Susan threw herself at it despite being half their size. It burst inward. The scene inside the cockpit was chaos. Both pilots unconscious, slumped in their seats. The captain was bleeding from his nose, burst blood vessels from rapid decompression. The first officer had vomited on his console, and the acrid smell filled the small space. Warning lights covered the instrument panel like Christmas decorations. Alarms blared, stall warning, terrain warning, overspeed warning. Get them out, Iris ordered, already sliding past the slumped captain. Susan and the linebacker grabbed him under the arms and pulled. The first officer was lighter, Susan and the wiry man dragged him into the aisle. Iris dropped into the left seat, the captain's position, and her eyes swept the instrument panel in under 2 seconds. Fighter pilot training, assess situation, prioritize threats, act. Altitude, 27,000 feet and dropping at 2,200 feet per minute. Airspeed, 350 knots and increasing, they were accelerating in the dive. Bank angle, 52 degrees right and increasing. Number 2 engine destroyed, metal fragments visible through the window, fire suppression system activated. Number 1 and 3 engines running but at asymmetric thrust. Hydraulic pressure, low on 2 of 3 systems. Fuel, leaking from the right wing. They had minutes. Maybe less. Her hands found the controls. The yoke felt different from the F-22's stick, bigger, heavier, less responsive, but the principles were identical. Aircraft wanted to fly. You just had to convince it. She pulled back on the yoke, not too hard, structural damage meant she couldn't load the airframe too heavily, and added power to the remaining engines. Carefully. Asymmetric thrust was trying to roll them further right. She countered with left aileron and rudder. The 777 fought her. The damaged wing created unpredictable lift. The destroyed engine was creating massive drag on one side. The control surfaces were sluggish from partial hydraulic failure and possible structural damage to the tail section. But Iris had flown F-22s with hydraulic failures, with one engine out, with half her control surfaces shot to hell over hostile territory. She knew how to make dying aircraft obey. "Come on," she whispered. "Level out. Just level out." The bank angle decreased. 50 degrees. 48. 45. The descent rate slowed. 2,000 feet per minute. 1,800. Altitude, 25,000 feet. "Come on, baby. Work with me." 40 degrees. 35. 1,500 feet per minute. And then, like a wounded animal finally listening, the aircraft leveled at 24,000 feet. The spiral stopped. Iris let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'm taking over," she announced to Susan, who was standing in the cockpit doorway, tears streaming down her face. Then Iris keyed the radio, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. American 617, this is." She paused. Just a fraction of a second. Because what she was about to say would open a door she'd thought was closed forever. "This is Captain Iris Blake, former United States Air Force, F-22 Raptor pilot, call sign Venom, taking command. Both original pilots incapacitated by rapid decompression. I have aircraft control. Number 2 engine catastrophically failed and destroyed. Structural damage to fuselage and right wing. Partial hydraulic failure. Fuel leak. Requesting immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport and full emergency response. I have 312 souls on board and I intend to get every one of them on the ground alive." The radio crackled. Long silence. Then a voice, military frequency bleeding over, Air Force fighter jocks monitoring civilian channels as they often did, stunned and disbelieving, "Say again your identification." "Did you just say Venom?" Iris froze. She knew that voice. She'd know it anywhere. "Negative," I said. "Captain Iris Blake, former Venom, this is Razor. From the 422nd Fighter Squadron." "Ma'am, we thought you were, we heard you quit after." He trailed off. Nobody in the squadron said it out loud. "After you shot down that airliner. After you broke. After you disappeared." Lieutenant Marcus, Razor, Chen. Her former wingman. 26 years old, hotshot pilot, loyal to a fault. He'd been flying escort that day 6 months ago. He'd watched her lock missiles on Flight 2847. He'd been on the radio when she'd reported, "Target destroyed," in a voice that had already started breaking. He'd been there when she turned in her wings and walked away, and he'd told her, "Ma'am, I understand. But the Air Force needs pilots like you. When you're ready to come back, we'll be here." She hadn't believed she'd ever be ready. "Razor," Iris said quietly, fighting to keep the aircraft stable, making constant tiny corrections to counter the asymmetric thrust. I did quit. I'm civilian now. But right now I've got 312 passengers and a crippled aircraft that wants to kill all of us. Can we catch up later? Yes, ma'am. His voice shifted instantly to professional, the way it always had when things got serious. Venom, sorry, Captain Blake, we're scrambling from Peterson Air Force Base right now. F-22s will be with you in 4 minutes. Whatever you need, we're here. The whole squadron. You're not alone up there. Something in Iris's chest cracked. Not broke, she'd been broken for months. But cracked open, letting something through. She didn't know if it was hope or just relief that she didn't have to do this completely alone. Copy that, Razor. I'll be glad to see you. American 617, this is Denver Center. A new voice, air traffic control, calm and professional in the way controllers were trained to be even when aircraft were falling from the sky. We have your emergency. Captain Blake, can you maintain control of the aircraft? For now, Iris replied, scanning the instruments, noting the fuel leak was getting worse, the hydraulic pressure dropping slowly but steadily. But I'm flying with significant structural damage, asymmetric thrust, degraded control authority, and a fuel leak that's going to become a problem if we don't get on the ground soon. I need the nearest long runway with full emergency response. Foam, crash equipment, medical, everything you've got. Understood. Colorado Springs Municipal Airport is 40 miles northeast. Runway 1735, 13,500 feet. We're clearing the airspace now. Negative. Iris checked her altitude, felt the sluggish response of the controls, calculated density, altitude and approach speed. Colorado Springs elevation is 6,200 feet. I need lower elevation, preferably sea level, but I'll take what I can get. High altitude means less air density, which means less lift and longer landing distance. With this damage and partial hydraulics, I need every advantage. What else do you have? Pause. She could imagine the controller checking charts, running calculations. Denver International Airport. Runway 16R/34L, 16,000 feet, elevation 5,430 feet. It's the best we can do in Colorado. We can have you there in 25 minutes. Iris did the math, fuel state allowing for the leak, rate of descent she could maintain safely, controllability. I can make Denver. But it's going to be a hard landing. Tell emergency services to expect a crash scenario. I'll do everything I can to keep it controlled, but this aircraft is badly damaged and getting worse. They should prepare for the worst. Copy that. Denver is ready for you. Emergency services moving into position. Godspeed, Captain Blake. Over the next 23 minutes, Iris did what she'd been trained to do in the F-22, fly an aircraft that was actively trying to kill her and make it obey anyway. The aircraft wanted to roll right. She forced it left with constant aileron pressure, her right arm already aching from the effort. It wanted to descend faster than safe. She added power to the remaining engines, carefully balancing thrust so the asymmetry didn't push them into another spiral. The damaged wing created unpredictable lift, sometimes generating more than expected, sometimes less. She compensated second by second, feeling the aircraft through her hands and feet, listening to the sound of air over the control surfaces, watching the subtlest changes in airspeed and altitude. Behind her, in the cabin, passengers were praying. Crying. Some were on phones, saying goodbye to loved ones. Others sat in shocked silence. A few were helping flight attendants prepare for emergency landing, going over safety procedures, checking that everyone had life vests, though over Colorado, those would be useless, making sure exits were clear. Susan appeared in the cockpit doorway. Captain Blake, the passengers want to know, are we going to make it? Iris didn't take her eyes off the instruments. I'm going to do everything in my power to get everyone on the ground alive. But I can't make promises. This aircraft is barely controllable and getting worse. Tell them to follow emergency procedures exactly. Brace positions. No loose items. If we crash, their best chance is staying in their seats and following evacuation procedures after we stop moving. Susan nodded, tears on her face, and left to brief the cabin. And then Iris heard them, the sound she'd thought she'd never hear again, a sound that had once been as familiar as her own heartbeat. The roar of F-22 Raptors. They came from below and behind, rising into formation like protective angels. 3 fighters, their angular stealth profiles unmistakable, sliding into position around the wounded 777. Iris saw them through her window, sleek, lethal, beautiful aircraft that had once been extensions of her own body. Venom, this is Knife. Visual contact established. You're holding altitude. We can see structural damage on the right wing, significant, looks like the engine explosion took out part of the leading edge and trailing edge flaps. But you're managing it. Looking good from here. Knife. Captain Sarah "Knife" Rodriguez. 32 years old, deadliest pilot Iris had ever flown with besides herself. They'd flown together in Syria, running interdiction missions against ground targets. Knife had gotten her call sign by flying so close to enemy aircraft that she could cut them without firing a shot, psychological warfare that often made enemy pilots break formation and flee. This is Banshee. Ma'am. The voice cracked slightly with emotion. It's an honor flying with you again. Banshee. First Lieutenant Jake "Banshee" Morrison. 24 years old, youngest pilot in the squadron. Iris had saved his life once when his aircraft took ground fire over Afghanistan and he had to limp back to base on one engine with his hydraulics failing. She'd talked him through it for 45 minutes, staying on his wing the entire time, ready to relay if his radio failed, guiding him to a controlled crash landing that he walked away from. And Razor, her old wingman, steady and calm the way he'd always been, "Venom, you've got this. Just like old times. We're your escorts. Whatever you need, we're here. You're not alone." Iris's voice betrayed her for the first time, cracking slightly. "Guys, I'm not Venom anymore. I'm just Iris. Just a civilian trying not to kill everyone on this plane." "Ma'am." Razor's voice was firm, the same tone he'd used when they flew combat missions and things got hairy. "You stopped being just a civilian the second you took those controls. You're Venom. You've always been Venom. Some call signs you can walk away from. Yours isn't one of them. And Venom doesn't fail." "I failed before," Iris whispered, knowing he'd hear it, knowing he knew exactly what she meant. "I killed 287 people." "No ma'am." Razor's response was immediate and forceful. "You followed orders. You made an impossible choice that saved thousands of lives on the ground. Nobody could have done that mission better than you. Nobody could have made that choice without it destroying them. But you carried guilt that wasn't yours to carry. The terrorists killed those people when they hijacked that aircraft. You just had to pull the trigger, and that's a burden nobody should carry alone. But today you get to save these people because you choose to. Not because someone ordered you. Not because you had to pick between 287 and 3,000. Because you're the only one who can, and you chose to step up. That's what Venom means. Precision. Excellence. Refusing to quit when everyone else would. When the situation is impossible and failure means death, Venom finds a way. That's who you are. That's who you've always been." Iris's hand steadied on the controls. The constant trembling in her arms, from strain, from fear, from old trauma, settled. She felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months, certainty. "Copy that, Razor. Thanks for the reminder." "Anytime, ma'am. Now let's get you on the ground." Denver International Airport appeared on the horizon, massive, sprawling, runways stretching like scars across the Colorado plains. Iris could see the distinctive white-peaked roof of the terminal, designed to look like snow-capped mountains. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. American 617, Denver Tower. Runway 16R is cleared and ready. All traffic diverted. Emergency services in position, we've got every fire truck and ambulance from 3 counties staged and waiting. Winds are 180 at 12 knots, gusting to 18. Altimeter 30.15. You're cleared to land any way you need to. If you need to belly land on the grass, we've got foam ready there too. Iris began her descent. Manual flight, every input, every correction, her hands and feet. The autopilot couldn't handle the asymmetric thrust and structural damage. The flight management computer had given up and was showing error messages. She was flying by feel, by experience, by pure skill accumulated over 2,200 hours in fighters and another 400 hours before that in training aircraft. At 10,000 feet, she began configuring for landing. Flaps down slowly, she couldn't risk deploying them too fast or too far, not with the wing damage. Gear down. 3 green lights. At least something was working. At 5,000 feet, the aircraft shuddered violently. Metal grinding against metal somewhere in the damaged wing. Passengers screamed. Iris corrected instantly, smoothing out the shudder, adjusting power and angle of attack. Easy, Venom, knife called from her Raptor, formation tight on the damaged wing. You're doing great. Speed is good. Descent rate is controlled. You're tracking perfectly for the runway. Hydraulic pressure is dropping, Iris reported. Down to 30% on System 2. I'm going to lose control authority soon. Copy that, Razor responded. But you've still got it now. Focus on what's working, not what's breaking. At 3,000 feet, passengers in the cabin were crying, praying, holding hands with strangers. Susan had briefed them on crash positions. Some were writing goodbye messages on phones, texts that would send automatically if they crashed. Others stared out windows at the ground rushing up to meet them. A few had their eyes closed, unable to watch. In the cockpit, Iris was completely focused. No room for fear. No room for doubt. Just the aircraft, the runway, the wind, the calculations running constantly in her head. At 1,500 feet, she keyed the cabin intercom. Her voice was calm, controlled, the same voice she'd used to brief missions over hostile territory when she'd been responsible for wingmen's lives. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Blake in the cockpit. We're about to land. It's going to be rough, rougher than any landing you've experienced. I'm bringing this aircraft down hard and fast because I can't risk losing what little control I have left. But I've landed aircraft in worse shape in combat zones. I've brought fighters home with engines on fire, hydraulics failing, and half my tail missing. I can bring this plane down. But I need you to trust me. Brace positions. Now. And when we stop moving, if we're not on fire, evacuate immediately. Don't grab luggage. Don't take photos. Just get out and get away from the aircraft. Do you understand? A chorus of yes, and okay, and God bless you, came from the cabin. At 1,000 feet, the F-22s called out, Venom, we're breaking off. Can't follow you to the runway. But we'll be watching. You've got this. Bring them home. At 500 feet, the damaged wing dipped suddenly. Iris corrected hard, feeling the aircraft's weight, its momentum, its dying strength. She was beyond the flight envelope now, flying at angles and speeds that the Boeing engineers had never intended, using techniques she'd learned in fighters. At 200 feet, she lined up perfectly with the runway's centerline. The F-22s had peeled off, they couldn't follow her to the ground, but she could hear them on the radio, their presence a comfort even though she couldn't see them. At 100 feet, emergency vehicles lined both sides of the runway, lights flashing, foam cannons ready. At 50 feet, Iris whispered to herself, to the aircraft, to God or fate or whatever was listening, "Come on, baby. Just a little more. Stay with me. Don't quit on me now. We're almost there." The landing was brutal. She brought the 777 down hard, much harder than standard procedure, firm enough that the landing gear struts compressed to their limits. But it was controlled. The main gear hit first with a slam that rattled every rivet in the aircraft. Passengers screamed. The damaged wing hit next, tilting the aircraft violently to the right, and sparks exploded like fireworks as shredded metal scraped along concrete. The aircraft veered right, pulled by the drag of the damaged wing. But Iris was ready. Full left rudder. Differential braking. Fighting the skid with everything she had. They slid. Skidded. Scraped. The sound was hellish, metal on concrete, rubber burning, alarms screaming. Emergency foam covered the runway ahead, and they plowed through it like a ship through waves. The aircraft yawed right again. Iris corrected. It wanted to spin. She stopped it. It wanted to leave the runway. She forced it back. And then, 400 feet from the runway's end, with foam coating the windows and smoke pouring from the landing gear, they stopped. The engine spooled down. The alarms continued their mindless shrieking. And for one long, impossible moment, there was silence in the cabin. And then it erupted. Crying. Cheering. Praying. Laughing. Screaming with relief. People hugging strangers. A man shouting, "We're alive. We're alive," over and over. A woman sobbing into her phone, I'm okay, tell the kids I'm okay." Iris sat in the captain's seat, hands still on the controls, shaking now for the first time. She'd held it together through the crisis, adrenaline, training, necessity. But now, with everyone safe, the trembling started. Her whole body shook. She whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I doubted I could do this. I'm sorry I walked away. I'm sorry I thought I was done." Razor's voice crackled one last time, "Venom, you just saved 312 people. You have nothing. Nothing, to apologize for. Welcome back." Emergency crews swarmed the aircraft within seconds. Slides deployed from exits, some damaged and not inflating properly, but enough working to evacuate. Passengers streamed out in a mix of orderly evacuation and controlled panic. Everyone was alive. Everyone was walking or being carried to safety by emergency personnel. Medical teams rushed the unconscious pilots to ambulances. Both would survive, the captain with minor brain damage from hypoxia, the first officer with broken ribs from where his seatbelt had restrained him during the violent maneuvers. But they'd live. Iris remained in the captain's seat until everyone else was off. Protocol. The captain is last to leave. Even though she wasn't really the captain, just someone who'd taken command in a crisis, she followed the rule anyway. Then she stood on shaking legs, steadying herself against the instrument panel, and walked down the aisle. She saw the empty seats. The oxygen masks still hanging like wilted flowers. The spilled drinks and dropped phones and abandoned shoes. The evidence of terror now past. Every seat empty meant a life saved. 312 lives. She'd killed 287 people 6 months ago. Today she'd saved 312. The math didn't balance. It couldn't balance. But maybe it was a start. Outside, on the tarmac, she stepped into Colorado sunlight and looked up. The 3 F-22 Raptors were still overhead, circling like protective angels. And as she watched, they formed up in tight formation and performed a victory roll, a maneuver reserved for heroes, for warriors returning from successful missions, for one of their own. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't bother wiping them away. A group of passengers saw her emerge and began applauding. Then more joined. Then everyone, passengers, emergency workers, airport personnel, reporters who'd already arrived. 300 people standing on a runway, clapping for the woman who'd saved them. Iris wanted to disappear. She wasn't a hero. She'd just done what needed to be done. But they kept clapping, and some were crying, and others were trying to approach her to say thank you. Airport security held them back gently. She needed to be debriefed. Medical evaluation. Incident investigation. She was met at the terminal by Colonel Sarah Vance, her former squadron commander. Vance was 52 years old, steel gray hair cut military short, eyes that had seen combat in 3 wars and could spot bullshit from 1,000 miles away. She'd been Iris's mentor, the one who'd pushed her to be better, to be the best. Captain Blake, Vance said formally. Then, softer, Venom. We've missed you. I'm not coming back, Iris said immediately, the words automatic. I can't go back to combat. I can't be responsible for, I can't do it again. I'm not asking you to, Vance interrupted gently. She gestured to a quiet corner away from the chaos, and they walked together. What you did today reminded everyone why you earned that call sign. Venom was never about killing. It was about precision. About doing the impossible when everyone else fails. About saving lives when the stakes are highest and failure means death. I killed 287 people, Iris said, her voice breaking. 6 months of guilt pouring out. They trusted that someone would save them, and I killed them. I pulled the trigger. I ended their lives. You followed orders that prevented 3,000 deaths on the ground, Vance corrected. Her voice was firm but compassionate. That wasn't your failure. That was an impossible choice that someone had to make, and it fell to you. The terrorists killed those people when they hijacked that aircraft and turned it into a weapon. You had to pull the trigger, and that's a burden you've been carrying alone for 6 months. But it wasn't your fault. Today, though. Today you chose to save 312 people when you could have stayed in your seat. When you'd sworn never to fly again. When you had every reason to walk away and let someone else handle it, except there wasn't anyone else. You chose to be Venom again. Not because you were ordered to. Not because you had to pick between bad options. Because you were the only one who could, and you chose to step up. Iris looked back at the damaged 777 surrounded by investigators and emergency crews. At passengers being reunited with families who thought they were dead, who'd been watching the news and preparing for the worst. At the F-22 still circling overhead, Razor and Knife and Banshee refusing to leave until they knew she was okay. I don't want to go back to combat, she said quietly. I can't shoot down aircraft anymore. I can't be responsible for those kinds of decisions. Then don't, Vance said simply. But consider this, teaching. Training the next generation. Sharing what you know so that when they face impossible choices, they have the skills to save lives. We need instructors who've been in combat, who know what it's really like, who can prepare young pilots for the reality of what they'll face. You can be Venom without being a weapon. You can save lives without firing missiles. Iris was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll think about it. Vance nodded. That's all I ask. She paused, then added, Razor and the others are landing now. They want to see you. They want to know you're okay. I'm not okay, Iris said honestly. But I'm better than I was 6 months ago. Today reminded me who I used to be. And maybe that person isn't completely gone. She was never gone, Vance said. She was just hiding. Because she thought she didn't deserve to fly anymore. But 312 people are alive because she came back. That's what Venom means. Not the killing. The saving. United States Air Force Academy, Colorado Springs. The lecture hall was filled with cadets, 120 young men and women in their crisp uniforms, notebooks open, eyes bright with dreams of flying fighters and earning call signs and becoming the next generation of warriors. At the front of the room, Captain Iris Blake stood in her uniform for the first time in over a year. Her wings gleamed on her chest, silver pilot wings she'd earned through blood and sweat and impossible hours of training. Above them, a new patch, Instructor, Advanced Crisis Management. She looked out at the cadets and saw herself at their age, idealistic, confident, certain that she could handle anything because she was that good, that well-trained. She knew better now. "I'm Captain Iris Blake, call sign Venom," she began. Her voice was steady, practiced. She'd given this lecture 3 times now, and it got easier each time. 13 months ago, I shot down a hijacked civilian aircraft. Flight 2847. 287 passengers and crew. I followed orders. I prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack that would have killed thousands. And it broke me. The cadets shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the sanitized, heroic version of combat they usually heard about. For 6 months after that, I couldn't fly. Couldn't look at aircraft without seeing the faces of people I'd killed to save others. I resigned my commission. I walked away from the Air Force, from flying, from everything I'd built my life around. I swore I'd never touch aircraft controls again, never be responsible for lives in the air again. 7 months ago, I was a passenger on a commercial flight when an engine exploded. Both pilots were incapacitated. I had a choice: stay in my seat and guarantee 312 deaths, or remember who I was trained to be. I chose to fly. And everyone lived. She paused, making eye contact with cadets in different parts of the room. Being Venom wasn't about the kills. It was about precision. Competence. The refusal to quit when the situation is impossible. I lost sight of that. I thought my call sign defined me by my worst moment, by the 287 people who died when I followed orders. But it doesn't. Your call sign, when you earn one, will define you by your ability to keep saving people even after you've failed. Even after you've broken. Even after you've sworn you're done. Mine defines me by the 312 people who went home to their families because I chose to be Venom one more time when it mattered most. You will face moments that haunt you. Decisions with no good answers. Days when following orders means people die. Days when you want to quit, when the burden feels too heavy, when you look at yourself and wonder if you're still the person you wanted to be. But remember, your training, your skills, your call sign, they're not about your worst moment. They're about what you do when everyone else has given up. When the situation is impossible. When you're the only one left who can save them. That's when your call sign matters. Not in the easy missions. In the impossible ones. She walked to the side of the stage where a large photo was displayed, the damaged 777 on the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles, with 3 F-22s visible overhead. This is American Airlines Flight 617. I landed this aircraft with catastrophic engine failure, structural damage, partial hydraulic failure, and a fuel leak. I had 312 souls on board. I got every single one of them on the ground alive. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because 7 months before this photo was taken, I'd given up. I'd decided I was done. I'd convinced myself that I didn't deserve to fly anymore, that my call sign represented failure and death and guilt. But when those passengers needed a pilot, Venom came back. Not because I wanted glory. Not because I missed flying. Because they needed someone who could do the impossible, and I was the only one there who had the training, the experience, the sheer stubborn refusal to accept failure. That's what your call sign will mean someday. Not your best moment or your worst moment. The moment when you're needed most and you choose to step up even when you don't want to, even when you're scared, even when you think you're not good enough anymore. Venom is back. Not in a cockpit flying combat missions. But here, in a classroom, teaching the next generation of warriors that sometimes the greatest victory is saving lives when you thought you had no victories left in you. When you've failed and broken and given up, and then you choose to try again anyway. Because call signs aren't about violence. They're about excellence. About being so good at what you do that when lives are on the line, people look at you and know, if anyone can save them, it's you. I walked away from war. But I'm still a warrior. Just a different kind. And my call sign means the same thing it always did: precision, competence, and the refusal to let people die when I have the power to save them. She stopped, looking out at the cadets. Some had tears in their eyes. Others sat with expressions of deep thought. A few looked scared, confronting the reality that their dreams of glory might someday include impossible choices and haunting guilt. Questions? Iris asked. A hand shot up. Young woman, maybe 20 years old, eyes fierce with determination. Ma'am, how do you live with it? The people who died? Iris didn't flinch from the question. I don't forget them. I carry them. Every day. 287 faces I never saw but imagine anyway. But I also carry the 312 who lived because I chose to try. The weight doesn't get lighter. You just get stronger at bearing it. And you make sure their deaths meant something by saving everyone you can after that. Another hand. Male cadet, older, maybe prior enlisted. Ma'am, do you think you'll ever fly combat again? No, Iris said simply. That part of my life is over. But I'm flying again, civilian aircraft, training flights, proficiency checks. I'm not afraid of it anymore. I don't avoid it. I just use my skills differently now. There are many ways to be a warrior. Combat is only one of them. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. When the class finally ended, the cadets stood and applauded, a tradition when instructors shared combat stories. But this applause felt different. Deeper. More personal. As they filed out, several approached her individually. Thank you, ma'am. I needed to hear that. My dad was on Flight 617. He talks about you all the time. Thank you for bringing him home. I'm going to remember this, ma'am. When things get hard. Iris shook their hands, met their eyes, saw herself in them, young and idealistic and not yet broken by impossible choices. After they left, she stood alone in the empty lecture hall. Through the window, she could see the flight line, rows of training aircraft, T-38 Talons gleaming in the sun. Beyond them, the mountains. Her phone buzzed. Text from Razor, lunch? Flying in from Peterson. Want to catch up? She smiled and typed back, sure. But you're buying. I saved 312 lives. You still owe me. His response, fair. See you at 1300. And ma'am? Proud to have flown with you. Then and now. Iris put the phone away and gathered her materials. She had another lecture in 2 hours, this one on emergency procedures and resource management. After that, a simulation training session where she'd throw impossible scenarios at student pilots and watch how they responded. She was teaching. She was flying again, not combat missions, but test flights and training exercises. She was using her skills. She was Venom. She'd always been Venom. She just hadn't believed she deserved to be. But 312 people had gone home to their families because she'd remembered. Because when they needed someone who could do the impossible, she'd chosen to be that person. Her call sign wasn't about the killing. It had never been about the killing. It was about the saving. And there were still people who needed saving. She walked out of the lecture hall into Colorado sunlight, wings on her chest, call sign earned through blood and skill and impossible choices. Captain Iris, Venom, Blake. Not a weapon. A guardian. And she was just getting started.